The checkbox control provides the users with a way of identifying whether a condition is true or false. So yes, no, okay, not okay, true, false, anything that has one state or another, you can use a checkbox for. And then in addition to providing good text that lets the user know what condition they're responding to, you want to be able to know whether or not a checkbox has been checked. And for that, you can use the checked and the check state properties. Now you'll use checked if there's two possibilities, true or false, yes or no, etc. What you can also do with the checkbox is have three possibilities. This is known as a tri-state checkbox. And the check state can be checked, unchecked, or indeterminate. So it's checked if the user checked it, it's unchecked if the user maybe checked it and then unchecked the checkbox, and if the user hasn't done anything yet, then that checkbox is indeterminate. So you can use checked or check state depending on whether or not there's two possibilities or three. You'll want to be able to respond to the checking or the unchecking of a checkbox, and the click event will occur when the checkbox is clicked. In addition, the checked changed event occurs when the checked property changes. So if the user checks a checkbox, then the checked changed event will trigger, and then you'll want to use the checked property to know whether or not this event occurred because the user checked the checkbox or unchecked the checkbox. If you're using a three-state, then you'll use the check state changed event, and that occurs when the check state property is changed. So you can use these events to respond to the actual checking or unchecking of the checkbox. You can change the appearance of a checkbox. If you want it to appear as a toggle button instead of a checkbox, then you can set the appearance property to button. You can also include an image in a checkbox control. You'll set the image property to the button you want to display, and then you can use the image align property to control where that image appears. The radio button is similar to the checkbox with one difference. You'll use a radio button when there are a number of choices that can be made. So with a checkbox, it's typically either yes, no, true, false, okay, not okay. But you'd use a radio button when there are more than two choices. You'll typically group radio buttons, and for that, you'll use the group box control or a panel control. So you'll add a number of radio buttons into the group box or the panel, and then one of them can be selected at a time. Well, you'll need to know which radio button is checked, and for that you can use the checked property. So if you have a number of radio buttons in a group, then you can just for each one query the checked property, and that tells you if that radio button's been checked. You can also respond to the checking or unchecking of a radio button the same way you do with a checkbox. The click event occurs when the radio button is clicked, and the checked changed event occurs when the state of checked has changed. And just as you can change the appearance of a checkbox, you can do the same thing with radio buttons. You can have the radio buttons appear as toggle buttons by setting the appearance property to button. You can have images appear in radio buttons, so you can use the image property to specify the image you want to display, and then use the image align property to control where the image appears. So let's go to demo and see a form that shows some examples of what you can do with checkboxes and radio buttons. I have the common Windows Forms controls project open in Visual Studio. Let's look at the checkbox radio button form, and this has examples of checkboxes and radio buttons. So this is just a standard checkbox, the VP approval checkbox, and I've set the text property to VP approval needed, and otherwise haven't really changed much of the look and feel of that. But this button here, VP has approved, is also a checkbox, but I want it to appear more as a toggle button, so I set the appearance property of this to button, and that way it appears as a toggle button. In addition, I've set the three-state property to true to indicate that this has three states. Can be checked, can be not checked, can be neither. So the default checkbox has two states, checked or unchecked, and the three-state property by default is false. This button has three different states. Here I want to have a checkbox that has an image, so I leave out the text. So I set the text property to empty and specify the image I want, and then I can choose where the image appears. In this case I have it in the middle to the left. For this checkbox I have not only the image but also text. And I set the text to appear in the middle right and the image to appear in the middle left, and they line up. I have radio buttons on the form, so for favorite language there are 3 choices: Visual Basic, Visual C#, both. So I have a group box which is called the language group box 1, and I put the radio buttons in there, and therefore only one can be selected. So each of these of course has a name, and therefore I can tell in code which was selected. I have another group box, Level of Expertise. This is level group box, and again there are radio buttons in here, but these look like toggle buttons because I've set the appearance property of them to button. And then the last set of radio buttons, these 2 have images to select the language. Okay, let's run this. I'm going to select checkbox and radio button controls. I can check the individual checkboxes. The printer is a 2-state. It's either on or off. Notice that the phone right now is in an indeterminate state. It's grayed out. Now it's unchecked. Now it's checked. I have some code in here that monitors the salary. Let's go see what that code actually is. When I leave the salary text box, if the salary text box is not empty and I've entered a salary of greater than 500,000, then VP approval is needed. And because the text is characters, I want to see if I've entered a decimal, so I'm using the decimal.parse. Nice thing about decimal.parse is if what I've entered is not a decimal, that will just return false rather than causing an exception. But if I enter greater than 500,000, then I'm going to set the checked property of the VP approval checkbox to true. So I'll enter 750,000 here, and when I leave, I not only display that I need to ask my VP for approval, but I check the VP approval needed checkbox. Well, how did this message box appear? When I checked the VP approval checkbox in code, or if I did it manually, that triggered the checked changed event. Now the checked changed event will occur not only because that checkbox is checked, well, the checked changed event will occur not only if the checkbox is checked, but also if it's unchecked. So what I'm doing in this code is checking to see if we're in here because the checkbox was checked. And if we are, then we're going to display this message. So again, if I check this, that code runs. And if I check it again, check changed event triggers. And because the checkbox is checked, I'll display this message. Okay, let's look at the radio buttons. I can select my favorite language. I can also select my level of expertise. And now I want to see the results. I selected C# and Intermediate Developer. Let's see how that happens. In the click event handler of the results button, I'm going to check to see if the VB radio button was selected. If it is, its checked property will be true. And then I'm going to build a string, which is results, and I'll append to that you like VB. If C# was checked, then CS radio button 1 will have its checked property to true, and I'll append that text. Otherwise, the VB C# radio button, which is both, was checked, and I'll append you like both. And I can do the same thing with the beginner, intermediate, and advanced radio buttons. The code is the same because they're just radio buttons. The only difference is that this set looks like regular radio buttons. These look like toggle buttons. But they're radio buttons, regardless. And then these buttons on the bottom, these are just regular radio buttons that display images rather than text. So what you've seen in this demo is how to control the look and feel of checkboxes and radio buttons, and then in code know when a checkbox or radio button has been selected as well as if it's been selected. You can use the combo box control when you want to give the user the ability to select from a list of available choices. And the way the combo box works is that there's a text box that displays the currently selected value, and then all of the possible values that can be selected are displayed in a drop-down list. And in addition, the user can type into the text box, and then you can decide whether the user can add new items to the list by typing, or if they can't. Well, the combo box is going to display items. How do you get those items into the combo box? Well, to do that, you'll use the items property of the combo box. Items is a collection property, and it contains one item for everything you want to appear in the drop-down list. Now you can populate the combo box at design time by using the String Collection Editor dialog box. So you'll click an ellipsis associated with the items property, and then in that dialog box you'll enter, one at a time, the items that you want to appear in the combo box. You can also populate the combo box at runtime by using either the add or the add range methods of the items property. You'll use add to add one item at a time to a combo box, or you can use add range to add more than one item at a time. Well, that's how you get the items into the combo box. Next thing you'll want to do is know which item was selected, because again, the combo box gives the users the ability to make a selection. So which item was selected? You can use the selected index property of the combo box, and that's going to return an integer representing the position in the list of the selected item. And it's zero base, so if the user selects the first item in the list, then selected index will be 0. You can also use selected item, and that property returns an object that represents the actual item that was selected. So that gives you the ability to tell which item was selected. The selected index changed event occurs when a selection is made. So if you want to run code when the user makes a selection, you can use that event, and then you can use those two properties to identify which item was selected. So you'll often use a combo box for lookup values. Customers, shippers, states, currencies, etc. So in the demo, we're going to see a combo box that displays state names. So the first thing you do is populate the combo box with state names, because you're going to display the actual names. But maybe what you want are the abbreviations for the states. So then you can create an array with state abbreviations, and then selected item is the name of the state, and selected index would correspond to the position in the array. So let's go see how to do this and other techniques with combo boxes in a demo. I've got Visual Studio open, and inside Visual Studio I have the Common Windows Forms Controls project open, and within that the combo box, list box, checked list box form. And that has combo boxes, which we'll look at in this demo, and then list boxes and a checked list box we'll look at in the next demo. So on this form there are 3 combo boxes, and each of them are going to display the same thing, which are controls. This first one, controls combo box 1, I've populated at design time, and to do that I clicked the ellipsis next to the items property and then entered the items that I wanted to appear in the combo box, 1 per line. The second and the third combo box, if I click the ellipsis here, there's nothing in the String Collection Editor because both of these are going to be populated at runtime. And then the same thing for the states combo box. Okay, let's go see the code for populating these. So in the forms load event handler, the first thing I'm going to do is populate the second of the combo boxes, and to do that I'll call the add method of the items property of the combo box. The items property is a collection property, and when I call add, I can add a new item to that combo box. So I'll add in code the same controls that I had done at design time on the first combo box. Another way I can populate a combo box is to use an array. So I'll create this array controls array, and I'll populate it with the same controls, and then I can just call add range, and then I can call the add range method of the items property and add all of these items at once. So I can do them one at a time, I can do them all in a batch. And then to populate the states combo box, I'll just add these 5 states one at a time. And now when I run this, each of these combo boxes displays the exact same thing. The one on the left was populated at design time, and the other 2 were populated at runtime. And then states was populated at runtime. So that shows you how to get items into the combo box. Next thing we'll want to know is when did the user make a selection and which one did they select. So if I make a selection from this combo box, say I choose for instance combo box, then I'm told I chose item number 5, which was combo box. And it's item number 5 because this is, of course, a 0-based list. So the first item in it label is item number 0, and combo box is item number 5. So I can tell the item number and the actual item. Let's go see the code for that. That's going to be in the selected index changed event handler for the combo box. And selected index tells me the item number I selected, and selected item is the actual item, which is an object, and so if I need to work with it as a string, I'll convert it to a string. Now for states, I don't want to know the item number, but I do want to know the state abbreviation, CA. So in this code, up at the top, I've created an array called state abbreviations, which contains the 5 abbreviations for the 5 states, and of course in the same order as the states appear in the combo box. And then in the selected index changed event handler for the states combo box, I still grab the index, which number state did I choose, and then use that to retrieve the appropriate element from the state abbreviations array, which is the state abbreviation, and then I display the actual state. So you've seen in this demo ways to populate combo boxes both at design time and runtime, and then also how to tell if the user selected something from the combo box and what they selected. The list box control shares a lot in common with the combo box. You'll use it to enable the users to select from a list. Differs in a couple of ways though. One is that it's not a drop-down list, so you see a number of the items at once, and you can control that by how high you make the list box. In addition, a user can select one or more items from a list if you let them. To populate a list box, you'll do the exact same thing that you did with the combo box. That doesn't change. So you'll use the items collection, which contains the items that appear, and then you can populate the list box at design time or at runtime the same way that you'd populate a combo box. And determining which item was selected is also the same. The selected index property returns the number representing which item was selected. Selected item is an object representing the actual item that was selected, and the selected index changed event occurs when a selection is made. So the basics of populating and the basics of determining which item was selected is the same between the combo box and the list box. But let's look at a couple ways list boxes differ. For one thing, you can enable the user to select multiple items from the list box. And to do that, you'll use the selection mode property. And this determines if you're allowing more than one item to be selected. If you set this to 1, which is the default, then the user can select only one item from the list. If you set the selection mode property to multi-simple, then the user can select more than one item in a list. For instance, by holding down the control key and then selecting a number of items. If you set selection mode to multi-extended, then the user can select multiple items by clicking one, holding down the mouse button, and dragging the mouse over a number of items that are next to each other, or by clicking an item, holding down the Shift key, and then selecting another item, and all of the items in between the two will be selected. Well, if the user can select multiple items in the list box, how do you know which items were selected? You can use the selected indices property to return a list of integers that represent the position of each selected item. So where a selected index returns one integer representing the item that was selected, selected indices returns a list of integers representing the items selected. And then similarly, the selected items property returns a list of objects representing the selected items. So let's go take a look at a demo that shows how to use list boxes in forms. So here's the combo box, list box, and checked list box controls form, the way we left it at the end of the previous demo. Let's now take a look at the list boxes on the form. Just as we had 3 combo boxes that displayed controls, we also have 3 list boxes that display the same controls. And similarly to the combo boxes, the first list box was populated at design time, the second 2 list boxes were populated at runtime. And then this states list box was also populated at runtime. And the code to do that looked very similar to the code used to do the combo boxes. So again, just as the combo box had an items property that contains the items in the combo box, the list box has an items property that contains the items in the list box. And if you want to populate at design time, then you click the ellipsis associated with the items property and use the string collection editor. So populating a list box is the same as populating a combo box. And the basic way of determining what item was selected in the list is the same as in the combo box. So if I click here, I now see that I've chosen item 6, which is list box, and if I choose a state, this code works the same as it did for the combo box. So the controls list box 1 selected index changed event occurs when I selected a control from the list, and I use selected index and selected item to display the index number and which item I selected. So for example, list box, item number 6, and the item I selected was list box. And for the state, as before, I have an array which contains state abbreviations, and when I select an item from the states list box, I'm going to grab the index number of the item I selected, use that to read that corresponding element out of the state abbreviations array, and display both the state abbreviation and the state. Okay, so far, that's exactly what we saw in the previous demo for combo boxes. Let's now look at a couple of ways that list boxes are different than combo boxes. And it centers around the number of items you can select. You can only select one item from a combo box, but you can select multiple items from a list box. So this second list box, controls list box 2, has its selection mode set to multi-simple. And there are 3 choices. None if you wanted the user not to be able to select anything. 1, which is the default, multi-simple or multi-extended. So this middle list box is set to multi-simple, and the one on the right is set to multi-extended. And therefore, I can select multiple items from this list, and I can do it by clicking them individually. And if I click them again, that unselects them. So each time I click, an item selected. In the third list box, where selection mode is set to multi-extended, if I want to select multiple items, then I can hold down the Control key and click, or I can click on one, hold down the mouse button and drag over the ones I want selected, or I can select one, hold down the Shift key, click another one, and everything in between will be selected. Now I want to know which ones I selected, so when I click the Results button, it's going to tell me that I selected 5 items from this third list box, and then it's going to display them in this list box here. So let's go see how that works. So again, when I click Results, then I'm going to display that information. So the first thing I'm going to do is clear out this selected controls list box, because I'm going to refill it with the items that were selected. Then I want to know how many items I selected. I can use the count property of the selected items collection property. That will tell me how many items were selected. And then selected items is a list of objects, so I can loop through that. So for each obj, which is an object in the selected items list, then I'm going to add each of those to that selected controls list box. And so again, what happens is I select multiple items. That tells me I selected 3, and then I put each one into this list. So what you've seen in this demo is how list boxes are similar to combo boxes in that they display a list of items the user can select from, but you've also seen how they differ in that you can give the user the ability to select more than one item. The checked list box control is a special case of the list box. Like the list box, it enables the user to select one or more items from a list of choices, but it differs in that it displays a checkbox next to each item. Now if you want, there can be a difference between selecting an item and checking it. Or it can be the same thing, and that is controlled by the check on click property. If that's set to true, then clicking an item not only selects it, but also checks it. Now how do you know if an item is checked? Well, the item check event occurs when an item is checked or unchecked. And then you can use the index property of the item check event args class to determine which item was checked. Now the current value property of that will tell you if the item was originally checked, and the new value property tells you if the item is now currently checked. So you use the index property to know which item was checked. The current value property of that class indicates whether the item was originally checked. And then you can use new value to determine if it's been checked, and that's why we're in the item check event, or if it's just been unchecked. So you can use the item check event and those properties to respond to an item in a check list box being checked. But how do you know which item or items were selected and checked? If you want to know which items were selected, you can use the selected index or selected indices and the selected item or selected items properties. So you can select one or more items and use those properties to find out which items were selected. If you want to find out which items were checked, then you can use the checked items and checked indices properties. And note that interestingly, there's no checked item or checked index property. Well, that's a lot of properties, so let's go see a demo of how you'd use a checked list box in a form and also how you would know which items were checked. I'm back in the combo box, list box, and checked list box controls form, and the last thing we want to look at in this form is the checked list box. And this checked list box displays the same controls as the combo boxes and the list boxes, but where it differs from the list box is that it has a checkbox. So I can click on an item to select it, and then I can also trap that and ask, do I really want to check this? And if I do, then it's checked. Or if I click this checked list box item and I say I don't want to check it, then it's not checked. So I'll check this, and now when I click results, I see that I've checked 2 items, radio button, and checked list box. So let's go back into design view and look at the checked list box. It's populated the same way as a combo box or a list box, either at design time as we're doing here or at runtime. The check on click property determines whether when you click an item you're also checking it. So here that's set to true. Now because this is a list box, I can use the selection mode property to determine how many items in the list box can be selected. I've left it at 1, but I could have set it to multi-simple and multi-extended if I wanted to be able to select and check multiple items at the same time. And then finally, I have a little bit of control over how the checkboxes look. I can set the 3D checkboxes property to true to have them appear a little sunken in, or I could set that to false if I wanted them flat. Well, now let's look at the code that ran when I selected one of these. And that's going to be in the checked list box's item check event. And that event fires when I click on an item in the list. Well, the first thing I want to know is which item did I select? This item check event takes as a second argument an instance of the item check event args class, which is represented by E. And so I can use e.index to give me an integer telling me which item in the list. So items of e.index is the item I selected, and I'm going to store that to checked item. The second thing I want to know is, are we in this item check event because I checked or unchecked an item in the list? Well, the new value property of this item check event args class tells me the current state after I checked it. So if that's equal to checked, meaning that I checked that item, I'm going to ask, do I really want to check this? And if I uncheck it, I'm going to ask, do I want to uncheck it? And if the answer is no, then I'm going to override what I just did and set the new value back to the current value, or the new value to the old value. Now, why would I want to do this? I might want to do this if I want to validate. The user checks an item. I might then run some code to see if that item really can be checked. And if not, then I can override that. And then when I clicked results to see what items I selected, I'm going to use the checked items property of that checked list box, which contains one item for each item that's checked. Therefore, there's a count property. So that will tell me how many items were checked, and then I'm going to loop through that collection of checked items and add them to the list. So what you've seen in this demo is how to use the checked list box. It's a list box that also has checkboxes. You can control the number of items that are selected, and you can also determine which items were checked.